I'll go ahead and start with the introductions. My name is Josh. I'm a management analyst here with Cosumnes CSD and working in the Park and Golf Operations Division. And I'm joined by
Rochelle Mangus. I'm a senior management analyst here in the Park and Golf Operations, and I oversee the park and golf budgets, as well as a couple of different programs that we are now in charge of.
All right. And so first things first, we are here to discuss park maintenance, park construction, park funding, especially specific to Benefit Zone 3. So this is a map of our district, the park district, and you can see here Zone 3 is up at the top, pretty much east of 99, west of Waterman, and then it goes from Bond up to Calvine. So hopefully all of us here this evening live in that area. I'm pretty sure that we all do, which is good. Agenda. So we're going to talk about some of the benefits of well-maintained parks, a little bit about how funding works, the difference between funds that are used for park construction and park maintenance. We're going to talk about the benefits that are provided by landscape and lighting benefit assessments. And those are the primary mechanism that is used for park maintenance here in Elk Grove. We're going to talk about some funding challenges, some projections for the future, some advantages of our park system and how our park system is funded. And then we'll go over the survey that we conducted last fall in this benefit zone and discuss some next steps for us as a group moving forward. All right, so we're going to jam through these 3 slides. This is not an exhaustive list of park benefits, but just want to highlight a few things. Why is it important for us to be here this evening? Why are we talking about this? Why do we care about parks and park maintenance? The primary thing folks think of when they think of parks, right, is you have a place to go and be active. If we don't have these public spaces, it's a lot harder for people to get outside, to get the exercise they need to be healthy. So it's important that we have these facilities throughout our city. In addition to physical health, they also support mental health. When you think about the benefits that you can reap just from being outside in a natural setting, going on a walk, kind of stepping away from screens and things like that, parks are a great asset to our city here in Elk Grove, and it's important that we take advantage of them to protect our mental health. And they're also supporting our environment. Trees is the thing that maybe comes to mind most often when you're thinking about removing pollution or removing greenhouse gases. Obviously, there are trees in parks. There's also large urban forests along our streets, and those areas are also maintained by the districts. And so trees are absolutely essential to our urban environment, and it's important that we give them the proper environment to flourish. And parks are a good example of that. So before we can have these different facilities, we've mentioned parks, we've mentioned landscape corridors, trails, things like that. Before we can have them, we got to build them. And when you're talking about parks, they're primarily funded by fees that are paid by developers. So as a developer comes into the city, they put in a new tract of homes, they're required to pay impact fees, and they're also required to provide a certain amount of land for park construction. So there are two main mechanisms that the city of Elk Grove uses to collect these fees and make sure that we're acquiring the appropriate amount of land. So the first piece of legislation to go over is the Quimby Act. So this is a state piece of state legislation. It requires that developers provide a certain amount of land to build park facilities for new subdivisions. So the law actually requires 3 acres. Us as the city of Elk Grove is able to require more. And so currently they're requiring 5 acres of park area per 1,000 residents. So if I'm a developer and I'm going to put in a new housing development, and it's expected to serve 1,000 residents, I have to provide 5 acres of parkland to construct a new park to serve that new subdivision. If for whatever reason I'm not able to, maybe the site doesn't allow it, instead of providing the land, I could be required to pay an in lieu fee. And so in lieu of providing the land, developers can pay fees, which the city, us as Cosumnes CSD, the park district, we can turn around and purchase the land that's necessary and build the park that's required to serve that subdivision. So that's a little bit about the Quimby Act. The second one is the Mitigation Fee Act. And so when you're talking about the Mitigation Fee Act, what you're trying to do is you're trying to mitigate the impact of these new residents on the status quo. So if I'm having a bunch of new folks coming into town, that's going to have an impact on my park facilities. I'm going to need to build new park facilities to serve both the new residents and ensure the people that are already living in the city enjoy the same level of service that they were previously. And so these fees are really intended to maintain the status quo. And it comes in the form of, I'm a developer, I'm putting in a new tract of homes, I have to pay X amount of dollars to build or expand capacity in existing parks. And so our chief of planning, he works closely with the staff over at the city to develop these fee programs and make sure that they are adequately providing for new park construction so that we can continue to enjoy the great facilities that we do already here in Elk Grove. So those are the two things to remember: Quimby Act, Mitigation Fee Act, and the big thing is that new parks are funded by developers. Okay, so now we have our big, beautiful new park. How do we maintain it? So new park construction funded by developers. Park maintenance is paid for by the property owners. So that's a big difference there. And I mentioned it before, the primary mechanism here in Elk Grove, it's not the only one, but the primary one is landscape and lighting benefit assessments. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So landscape and lighting assessments, or L&L assessments, these have become increasingly popular. It's kind of old history now, but after the passage of Proposition 13 in 1978, which limited the property tax here in California, in order to maintain the services that residents still wanted, for example, parks, local agencies had to come up with different funding streams, revenue streams to provide those services. And so one of the tools that has been used since that time are these landscape and lighting acts. They were created by the Landscape and Lighting Act of 1972. One big difference between an L&L benefit assessment and property tax. So an assessment is not based on a property's value. If I own a home and it's worth $200,000 and Rochelle owns a home and it's worth $400,000, her assessment is not, and let's say we're neighbors, her assessment is not going to be any higher than mine when we're talking about park maintenance funding. Whereas obviously her property tax bill is going to be significantly higher because her property is valued at twice mine. And so when we're talking about those assessments, it's not based on the property value. What it's actually based on is what's called a special benefit. So what do we mean by that? So special benefit is something unique to a parcel, and it's benefiting that parcel in a way that is different from it might benefit the general public. So if I'm living in, let's say, Galtz, or and I'm coming into town and I'm visiting a park, obviously I'm benefiting from that park, but I'm not benefiting from that park in the same way that a property owner who lives on the same street as the park is. And so a state certified engineer is going to look at those types of, I guess, factors to determine, okay, this person living in this area should pay this much for park maintenance at this facility. Someone further away might pay a lesser assessment. So we're going to look at all of that and come up with a special benefit for each specific parcel in the landscape and lighting district. Okay, so a little bit more about how this plays out in practice for us here in Elk Grove. So again, this is a picture of our park district. You could see here, there's numbers 1 through 13. Those represent our different zones of benefit or benefit zones. Each of these benefit zones is paying its own assessment. And that assessment, again, it's based on the special benefit that's provided to the parcels in that zone. It's going to depend on really two main factors. It's going to depend on what park facilities or landscape is in that zone. If you don't have a lot of parks or a lot of streetscapes or trails, it's not going to cost as much to maintain the facilities in that zone. It's also going to take into account, each assessment is going to take into account how many property owners are paying for this maintenance. If you have a zone with a lot more property owners, that burden is going to be shared amongst more people. So potentially you could have a lower assessment, and then vice versa. And so each of these assessments, and we'll, on the next slide, we'll have a little graph showing you how they compare. It's taking into account what the special benefit is, how many parcels there are to come up with a number unique to each zone. The other thing that's important to consider when you're talking about landscape and lighting assessments is once they are in place, they're very hard to get rid of. They're also very hard to increase. And so they're pretty, I would say, consistent once they've been approved by property owners. So for us, our assessments are tied to a consumer price index. And as that consumer price index increases, we are then able to increase our assessment concurrently. So let's say the CPI goes up 1% this next year, we could potentially increase our assessment rates 1%. Now we always have to tie our assessment to the cost that we're incurring as a district. So if our costs for some reason are reduced dramatically, we're not going to necessarily increase an assessment just because the CPI has gone up. Each year we have to justify what we're assessing based on the cost that we're incurring to maintain these facilities. And the last thing I want to touch on when we're looking at this map here is there's 13 different benefit zones. We are not able to move money from one zone to the other as needed. So each zone has its own assessment. In our case, we're going to be talking about zone 3 later on in the presentation. We're really talking about the zone because we're not currently collecting enough funds to maintain our standard level of service in this area. We're not able to take money from, let's say, zone 1, move it over to zone 3 to make up that difference. The money that's collected in each zone can only be spent on services and improvements that are benefiting that specific zone. So that could be maintaining the parks in that zone, maintaining the trails in that zone, maintaining the landscapes, corridors or streetscapes in that zone. It could also be used to maintain district-wide facilities that everyone in the district are benefiting from. For example, the sports park. Bartholomew Sports Park brings people from all over California and even beyond to our city here in Elk Grove, generating revenue for everyone in the district. And so that's one of the facilities that's classified as district-wide. So everyone pays to maintain that facility. Other district-wide costs would be staff who are working on behalf of the entire district. So folks like myself and Rochelle, when we're working on the budget, we're not just budgeting for zone 4 or zone 5 or zone 3. we're budgeting for the entire district. And so everyone helps pay for the costs associated with Rochelle and I, for example. So those are some examples of district-wide expenses. But for the most part, what's collected in each zone, majority of it is staying in that zone, and we're unable to move from one zone to the other. So hopefully that's clear. If we have questions on that, I definitely want to circle back at the end. Here's our chart that we're referring to. Again, this is showing the assessments in each of our 13 benefit zones. If you look at that blue bar down there at the bottom, those are our original 13 benefit zones. And then you'll see some green bars that are on top of the blue bars. So what these green bars represent are, we refer to them as overlay assessment districts. And essentially what has occurred in these cases is that residents in these areas have gone ahead and approved an additional assessment for the park and recreation facilities in their neighborhood. So if you look at Camden, you can see that their base assessment is $302 per single family home. They've also approved an additional assessment for the Camden Park Assessment District. And Camden Park includes Mixed Park as well as Camden. And so the folks in that area are paying an additional $160. So that happened some time ago because in Camden, there was identified, a shortfall was identified for park maintenance in that area. And so you can see there, that's one example of residents saying, okay, we want to go ahead and approve a new assessment to make sure we're maintaining our park facilities. And if you look here, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 different overlay assessment districts. And they vary, again, just based on the amenities that are being improved or maintained with those overlay assessment districts and the number of people that are paying those rates. All right, so I hopefully gave you some good information on what an assessment is and what they're used for, kind of a little bit about how they work. It's not the most straightforward funding mechanism, I would say. It can be a little bit confusing, and so that's why we want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. But why would we even want to have these assessments, right? Why wouldn't we just have, I don't know, why wouldn't we just use property tax or some other revenue stream for this purpose? Why wouldn't we do a sales tax? Things like that. Again, there are other options that we have, but L&L assessments, they have some distinct or unique benefits to them that make them a great tool to fund park maintenance in particular. The first is that they're only charged to property owners who are actually benefiting from the improvements in the services. So as a property owner, that's a good thing because you're not paying for something that maybe you're not benefiting from. We as a district, we have to show a clear special benefit to your property in order to propose and levy an assessment on it. Contrast that with if you're talking about, let's say, a sales tax. A sales tax, when it's collected, it can really be used for whatever. There's no real restraints on what it can be used for, how it can be used. L&L assessments have that accountability built into them, which is really, really nice. And then the other thing to touch on is it really helps us operate more like a business. Again, we cannot levy an assessment if we can't justify, if we can't show that we're incurring a cost. So if our costs, let's say our cost to maintain a particular benefit zone, it's $100,000 a year. We can't levy $500,000 in assessment. We have to match up our costs with what we're actually assessing folks. So again, it has that built-in accountability for property owners. You know that your money is being used to benefit your property, and you know that we're not just collecting money just to collect money. If we can't, if we're not spending it to benefit your property, we can't collect it in the first place. So it's really, really good tool in that regard. And the second thing is it empowers property owners. So we showed those overlay assessment districts on that other slide. Each one of those 7 assessment districts is an example of a group of property owners, usually a pretty small group, but sometimes larger, getting together and deciding, we want to see our parks maintained at a acceptable level or higher level. And, we prioritize that. We want to protect these facilities. We want to protect this investment in our community. And most times it's really the property owners who are leading that charge. So that's empowering for you. On the other hand, if us as a park district or some other agency, if we're trying to levy an assessment that is unpopular or property owners just don't approve of it for whatever reason, well, they have the opportunity to vote and say, no, we don't want this. No, we don't want this service or improvement, or no, we think that you're assessing too much, whatever the case may be. So there's a lot of accountability when you're talking about L&L assessments, and there's lots of empowerment of the actual property owners that are going to be paying these assessments. So, all right. So our funding challenges. Kind of touched on this. We've mentioned that we do have a method of increasing the assessment over time. It's tied to the consumer price index, and so it definitely has increased since it was initially founded. But unfortunately, our costs aren't necessarily tied to that same consumer price index. So if our costs go up 5% one year and the CPI only goes up 1%, over time, that difference can really cause an issue. And that's really what has happened in this benefit zone. Some examples for us all, water rates. So water is a big chunk of our costs to maintain these different landscapes in benefit zone 3. And if you're looking at our rates from 2017 to 2020, our rates have increased 14%. During that same time, our assessment has only increased 7%. And so again, over time, it's not a big issue if you're just looking at 1 year, but when you have an assessment that's been in place since 1997, over the course of 20 plus years, those types of differences can really cause an issue, and it definitely has in this benefit zone. Another example is the minimum wage. So same time span from 2017 to 2020, minimum wage has gone up 14%, same thing. So that's doubling, it's increased twice as fast as our assessment has. When we're looking at these 2 particular costs, one of the reasons I wanted to highlight these is we expect that they'll continue to outpace our CPI adjustments or CPI increases. We know that minimum wage is going to continue to go up until at least 2023, up to $15 per hour. And we also know that our region is pretty much perpetually in drought. There's more and more people living here. There's more and more strain on our water system. And we expect that, the water districts are going to have to cover their costs. And so they're going to have to continue to increase their rates. And when you're looking at the consumer price index, when you consider that that's really the main way that we can increase these assessments once they're in place, you look at that, you consider the fact that we're in the midst of a pandemic right now. We have seen a pretty steep economic downturn, although we may be coming out of it. I don't know that we can really expect to see a large CPI increase this next fiscal year. So in 2019, 2010, 1 year after the start of the Great Recession, the increase was 0.1%. So who's to say what it'll end up being for us here in 2020, 2021? But I think it's a safe assumption that it's not going to be a large increase, if an increase at all. So the last thing I want to touch on is, for those of us that are living in this benefit zone, you're probably aware there's 2 parks that are yet to have been built. We have 2 unbuilt parks in benefit zone 3. And while we have collected most of those funds to build those parks, again, that's coming from developers who are putting in homes in this area. We don't have the funding for the maintenance, so they have remained unbuilt. But again, that's another, if we were to go ahead and say build one or both of those parks, that's just gonna increase the deficit that we're experiencing to maintain these facilities in benefit zone 3. So that's just another thought to consider when you're trying to figure out, okay, how did we get into this position? How are we not collecting enough money to maintain these facilities? And so when you're looking at these parks in benefit zone 3, it's very noticeable that there's a problem, especially in the summer. In order for us to try and limit our deficit spending, for lack of a better term, we've been forced to reduce some of our typical park maintenance services. We're irrigating the parks less. We're not mowing as frequently. We're not fertilizing turf. We're not aerating the turf at our parks in this area. You're not receiving weed control in grass and in the planters, and the shrubs are not being pruned at these parks either. And it's it doesn't sound like a lot if you're just looking at it on a paper, but when you go out to say a Lombardi Park or Caramanos Park, it's very clear that something is going on. This isn't normal for a park in Elk Grove. If you drive, on the other side of the freeway and you go to one of the parks in a different benefit zone, the difference becomes clear. And so again, those are measures it's not something that we want to do. We don't enjoy having our parks maintained at a lower level. It's simply a necessity to try and use the funds that we do have as prudently as possible so that they last as long as possible. So what does that look like? So this graph here, this shows the reserve fund in benefit zone 3. You can see here that the overall balance is decreasing at a pretty rapid rate. If you look at that total there, about $500,000, it sounds like a lot of money, and I don't want to say that it isn't. It's certainly significant. But when you consider the fact that replacing one playground could cost upwards of $400,000, you can see how very quickly that reserve fund could be completely wiped out. And I think that shows why we would consider that amount of money to be insufficient. There are a number of parks in this zone that are getting older. They're getting up there in age. They may have been built 20, 25 years ago. And so that's getting close to the time where we would look to replace a playground in order to make sure that it's safe, in order to make sure that it is providing a great play experience for the residents that are utilizing that park and that play structure. So the other thing to look at, if you're looking at the green bar and the yellow bar. So the green bar is referred to as a cash flow reserve. Okay, what does that mean? So our landscape and lighting assessment is collected along with property tax. So if you look on your property tax bill, you'll see it as a separate line item listed on there. And so when the county is collecting those funds, it's not as if we get every month 1/12 of our landscape and lighting assessment. We're only getting those funds 2, maybe 3 times a year. And so we need to have a cash flow reserve in order to make sure that we have money for payroll, for operations, in between those payments from the county. Contrast that with the capital improvement fund, that yellow bar there. Those are the funds that are really supposed to be set aside for those big asset replacement projects, the playgrounds, the pump replacements at a park. Those big ticket items that we know they only last a certain amount of time. We need to be saving money to replace them when the time is appropriate. And then one last number to consider to kind of put this in perspective. Our operating costs for this benefit zone are approximately $1.1 million. So again, that's why we're looking at this number of 500,000 and saying, you know what, this is not a sustainable zone. We're not collecting the funds that we need to maintain our typical level of service and save money for asset replacement. All right. I think that's enough bad news for us, at least for the time being. Okay. So we talked about, hopefully painted a good picture for us all about what the problem is. But I also want to take just a brief moment to highlight, we have a lot of advantages in Elk Grove and even in this benefit zone that we're identifying as being unsustainable. If you look at the amount of parks and just landscape acreage we have here in the city, it's really exceptional. The Quimby Act requires a 3-acre minimum, and we have about 5 acres of park and open space per 1,000 residents. This benefit zone on its own has 33 acres park space. And so, we're obviously having an issue, I would say a problem collecting the appropriate amount of funds to maintain these facilities, but the fact that we have them in the first place is a great starting point. And then the other thing is we do have a dedicated source of funding to maintain these parks, these trails, these streetscapes in Benefit Zone 3. Yes, it's not sufficient to cover all of the costs that are associated with that activity, but it's getting us it's getting us most of the way there. So I mentioned our operating costs about $1.1 million. We're collecting about $900,000 annually for park and landscape maintenance in this zone. And so it's not a huge difference. It's not a ton of ground that we need to make up. Obviously we need to be collecting more than our operating costs in order to be saving money for asset replacement. But again, the current assessment, it's providing a dedicated funding stream for this purpose, and it's getting us, I would say, the majority of the way there. It's providing the majority of the money that we would need. Okay. So this isn't a new situation. It's not a new issue in Benefit Zone 3. So we've had a number of surveys and initiatives going back all the way really to 2007 with mixed success. If some of those overlay assessments that were pictured on the graph, they're actually in this benefit zone. There's actually 3 of them. And so there have been pockets of this area that have gone ahead and approved a new assessment for their neighborhood park. And that's because of the outreach and the education efforts on the part of the district. It's also because of residents in those areas recognizing the need and deciding to take on a leadership role and champion the cause for their neighborhood park. And so when you consider that there are 3 overlay assessments already in this zone, we already have kind of a roadmap to success. We already have some best practices some guides to follow. And that would be our goal as a district, is to establish one or more additional overlay assessments in this area to provide the necessary funding, make up that shortfall, restore those services, get those unbuilt parks constructed and maintained, replace assets that are at the end of their useful life. And really, we have some, it's a straightforward, it's not an easy process, but it's a straightforward process. And so what really needs to happen is, again, for us to establish that assessment district that we have identified as necessary to provide those necessary funds to restore those services, replace those assets, et cetera, we need to have a vote. This is one of the nice things about LNL assessments, again, where property owners are empowered to approve or not approve assessments as they see fit. And so that's kind of the end goal, is for us to work with residents in this area, have a official mail-in ballot proceeding to establish a new assessment district. And like that, we can really change all of these neighborhoods pretty quickly, improve them very quickly, I should say. So what does that look like? I mentioned these elections are conducted by mail. So property owners, they'll receive a ballot in their mail. Hopefully they'll all return it, but some percentage of them will return the ballot. Yes, I will pay this assessment. No, I don't want to pay this assessment. The district will tabulate all those returned votes. If 50% plus one of the return votes approve the new assessment, it will be approved. The new assessment district will be established. The votes are weighted. They're weighted by the amount that the property will be assessed. So I'll go back to Rochelle and I. Let's say that Rochelle owns 2 homes in this area. I only own 1. Her property is going to be assessed at twice the rate that mine will, simply because she owns 2 homes. So her vote is, for the practical purpose, going to count for 2 of mine. So the votes are weighted, and the magic number is 50% plus 1. That's the approval that we need to establish a new district. So one of the things that we like to do in preparation for these ballots is to conduct surveys, primarily because there are a lot of costs associated with ballots. Each new assessment district, we have to create what's called an engineer's report. The engineer's report is going to identify all of the services and improvements that are going to be paid for with this new assessment. It's going to identify what each parcel will be responsible for paying for, things of that nature. And so we have to pay a state certified engineer to create that document. We have to pay the county to actually facilitate the mail-in ballot proceeding. So it's not cheap. For this zone, we anticipate it will be approximately $35,000 to have this election to establish a new assessment district. And we don't want to invest that money in an election that's going to not be approved. And so part of the way that we do that is conducting these surveys to see what the support or approval is before we go ahead and pay for the engineer's report and the ballot and all that good stuff. And so that's what we did last fall. Some of you may have received this survey in the mail. You can see here the results. To summarize, I would say that we had a good result, not great. You can see that 52% said they would support a new overlay assessment district to improve and maintain the parks in their neighborhood. which is over that 50% plus one, but it's not a lot of wiggle room, right? It's pretty close. And so when you look at the fact that it's pretty close, when you consider the fact that, again, we were back in, I guess, April, May, when we were deciding, okay, what do we need to do here? We were really at the start of this pandemic, but you know, just a lot of uncertainty. How is that going to affect our local economy? Are folks going to be out of work? You know, that makes a big difference, right? If you're working or not, whether or not you would support a new assessment on your property. So the decision was made to not go ahead and move forward with the ballot at that time. And instead, we've decided to continue with our efforts to provide information to residents in this area and work with our residents to build support, educate folks on what's going on and why it's important that we protect our investment in parks and recreation by establishing a new assessment district. Okay, so I mentioned before, we have kind of a roadmap for us to follow, and we've seen it be successful in other places. It really starts with it doesn't have to be a large group, but it has to be a dedicated group of volunteers. Volunteers are essential because a couple of different things. One, it's just strength in numbers, right? So there's only two of Rochelle and I, and there's only 24 hours in a day. But if we have, you know, 8 volunteers, then all of a sudden that's 4 times as many people who are working on this initiative. So there's that piece. There's also the fact that volunteers are able to advocate on both sides of an issue. So if you're volunteering in your neighborhood, you are able to speak directly to your neighbor and say, we have to do this because of XYZ, whatever your belief is. For us as a district, that's really not appropriate for us to speak in that manner. Our role is really to provide information. Clearly, we are a park district. We see value in park and recreation facilities, but we're not in a position to advocate for new assessment districts in this case. So for you as an individual resident, that is something that you are able to do. And so that's where the partnership aspect comes into play, us providing the information, being a resource, using the resources that we have as the district to reach out to residents with mail information, social media, news appearances, newspaper articles, all of that good stuff, working hand in hand with our neighborhood volunteers to build support and build consensus around protecting our investment in parks and recreation. So that's really that's like 1A. That's what we need to do. What we have already done in this area and what we need to continue to do is build these volunteer groups and continue to work together to move this forward. If you haven't already attended our 101 LNO 101 class, I definitely encourage you to do that, and encourage you to encourage your neighbors to do that as well. It's there's some similarities between what we've gone over tonight and what we cover in that class. We go into a little more detail in the 101 class, and we talk a little bit more about our budget as a whole, but very helpful to attend that class and get that context. We are recording this meeting, so hopefully I presented it clearly so that folks can go back and watch it and get something out of it. It will be posted on our website here in the next week or so you can refer people to that if they weren't able to come tonight and they want to see what we talked about. And then the last two, we had a work day recently at Lombardi Park. I thought it was great from the standpoint of the folks in that neighborhood. We're able to work kind of side by side, team, I guess team building in a sense. And we, in the span of 2 hours, we really did make a pretty big difference in that park, just from pruning and weeding and just some simple things like that that have been necessarily reduced by the district. It's great to have a group of volunteers step in to fill that need. Obviously, we're reducing the service to try and make the funds that we're collecting last as long as possible, but doesn't mean we can't work together to try and make the park look as good as it possibly can in the meantime. I think that's a great thing that we can do. And if anyone is interested in doing a work day at a park in your neighborhood, please let me know. Be happy to help organize that with you. So yeah, that's a big one. And then the last one, again, is just responding to surveys. We will be doing some additional surveying this fall. And in order for us to make a good recommendation to our board of directors and make sure that we are going forward with a ballot when it's appropriate to do so, we need to have the best information possible. And the only way for us to get that is for people to respond to our surveys. And so definitely encourage you, when you receive a survey, please respond. Please encourage your neighbors to respond. It really does help us do our job better and take care of these parks as best we can. All right. And so before we wrap things up here, we've mentioned a few of our success stories. We have one of our success stories on the call with us tonight, so hopefully she will chime in. But these pictures represent 3 of our most recent overlay assessment districts that were approved. The one on the left, Joseph Perry Park, it was still last year. Last year. 2019, that they approved the Perry Ranch Improvement District. And so, like I said, it doesn't take long to turn these parks around when you turn the water on and you trim the shrubs and you get some weed treatment going on. That park looks 180 degrees better than it did before the establishment of the improvement district. We've recently gone back in and been able to do some new plantings along the streets in that area, added mulch to the flower bed. It's become readily apparent to all of us what a big difference some bark makes. It seems silly, but it does have a big impact. And then this picture here, Miss Jill Jones, she was a great volunteer. She still is a great volunteer. Obviously, she's here tonight. And her group, they just did a ton of outreach, really going door to door. A lot of success with Facebook and Nextdoor posts and Facebook groups. So she might be able to give some, best practices for doing that. Especially when you consider that going door to door is maybe not as possible right now as it may otherwise have been in the past. Those social media outlets can be a huge help. But this park, McDonald Park, this is an example of basically a new park being constructed. Half of it was in place. The second half was undeveloped. That project's going out to bid here in the next month or so. And we are expecting it to be completed sometime next year. And that's after it sat, the undeveloped portion sat vacant for many, many years. And then the last one here, McConnell Park. So this park is an example of a facility where the services were reduced. Part of the turf was eliminated in order to try and, again, reduce costs, conserve the funds that we had available to maintain the facility. A group of residents got together, worked with the district, established a new assessment for that area. It's now one of the most beautiful parks, I think, in Elk Grove. It's kind of out of the way, so you may not have seen it before, but when you compare this new neighborhood park to the other small neighborhood parks in Elk Grove, it looks just as beautiful as any of them. And it's really because the residents in that area decided to approve this, a new assessment to make it possible. So those are just three of the more recent examples of the district working with residents to have a successful outcome. So want to leave you with that kind of on a positive note. We do have lots of information on our website. Again, this can be a pretty, there's a lot of different things to consider when you're talking about park maintenance funding. You know, our budget it's a large budget, and it can be helpful for people to take the time to look at our budget in greater detail, look at our engineer reports in greater detail, and really get a better understanding for yourself, so you can feel comfortable that you know what you're talking about when you're going to your neighbor. And so these are some links on our website where you can do just that. The first one is our main park funding page. There's a video on there. It's about 3 minutes long, and it basically takes this hour that I was just talking and condenses it down to 3 minutes. It's a great thing to share on your Facebook page or whatnot if people haven't already seen it. The BZ3 page has all of our information that's specific to this benefit zone. And then the last one, the finance page, that's where you'll find those engineer reports I was talking about. You'll also find our budget on there if you want to get a little more detail on what that looks like. And that's all up there for the last 5 fiscal years. So we do make every effort to be transparent and give people the information they need to fully understand what is going on with the parks in their neighborhood. And the last resource is just my contact information. You're welcome to share this wherever and however you like. I try and be as available as possible, so that if folks have questions or concerns, you can reach out to me directly, and we can have a conversation about whatever is going on. So yeah, just that's there for you. Please feel free to take it down, email me, or call me as you need. So that brings us to the end of our slides. Thank you for bearing with me through all 31 of those. But we do have some time for questions and answers. If folks would like to unmute themselves, or maybe we have to unmute you, I'm not sure.
I can unmute everyone, Josh. The first question that came in is, what month is the next survey being conducted? I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody.
Yeah, so the next survey, we're expecting it to go out actually next month. It's going to be a little bit of a different structure than we typically would do, in that it's going to be a digital survey. And so that'll give us a little bit, couple of advantages. It'll give us a little more information than we might get from a paper survey. Just, the data will be more usable in the sense, and we'll also get that information a lot quicker. And so that'll be distributed next month. So folks will be able to respond and let us know what they think.
Okay.
Josh,
yeah,
it's Jim. Is the format for the survey going to be similar to what you guys have done in the past as far as the questions? Is it about, are you willing to pay more for a nicer park, or?
Yeah, it's going to be similar. There will be just a few more questions than we've done in the past. Right now, we're looking at having a total of 4 questions. Whereas when we've done the paper surveys in the past, there's really been 1, maybe 2 questions. And then obviously the format being digital, it is different in that sense, but we're basically looking to get the same information. So it will be similar in a lot of ways.
So is it something coming into the mailbox and then you respond online? Is that what you mean by digital?
So it'll actually be distributed by text message. So folks will receive a text message inviting them to participate in the survey.
How did you get everyone's cell numbers?
We're working with the vendor that this is what they do.
Oh,
surveys.
really?
Yeah, through text message.
Oh, interesting.
So, something different for us. We've never done this before.
Sort of a pilot program for us to see how well it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I only know this because I teach a class for the police department on fraud and scams. And the scammers right now are especially using text messaging. And they want you to click on a link, and then the link takes you somewhere where then they want your credit card, blah, 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 blah. But
Yeah.
there's a lot, I mean, people have been given a heads up. Don't click on anything that comes in on a text unless you know the source.
Yeah, so that's
Information.
definitely.
We can try to put some
Something that
post out
legitimizes you.
again. Yeah. We'll just
Yeah.
do some social media posts to let people know that it's actually us that is doing the
I
survey.
think, yeah. Mhm. Maybe on Nextdoor and stuff too, Facebook.
Yeah, and I think we'll work to make the, text message it's gonna have a message. So it's gonna say something like it's from the district, or it's from,
Yeah.
hey, this is Josh with Cosumnes CSD, whatever that looks like. So we're definitely gonna work to try and make it, I guess, seem as legit as possible.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, the reason we're not surveying right now is people are getting a ton of, I get so many text messages every day about the election. And so we wanted to wait until after that. So hopefully folks are more receptive to getting a text message and responding. But like Rochelle said, this is something new for us. As always, when you do something new, it might not work out. But we're working with a contractor who has a lot of experience in this area. And so we feel confident that it'll be successful and we'll get some good information. Really what we're looking to do with this next survey is just, validate the survey that we had from last fall. We don't want to see results come back where it's maybe 20% in support. If the results are similar to what we saw previously, or ideally even a little bit better, then that's what we're hoping to see.
Well, it's probably less expensive, isn't it? Just you're avoiding postage and mailing costs and.
It is, yeah, that was part of our consideration, is that
Yeah.
it is a little more cost effective to survey using a digital tool. And working with these folks, we're actually able to know with a reasonable amount of certainty that the people who are responding are the same people who would be paying the assessment.
Yeah.
As opposed to, Rochelle and I, we could go on SurveyMonkey or some other survey tool, and send something out that way, but we're not able to know that the data is valid. So we'll see how it works out. I'm excited about it. I'm confident that it'll be good.
So Josh,
Well, I think more people are checking their cell phones these days than they are their mailboxes.
You might be right. Gloria, did you have a question, Gloria?
it's Lisa, Josh.
Lisa?
And I live in Perry Ranch, and so within Perry Ranch, there has been additional building inside of Perry Ranch. These people will be included, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, because that assessment is already in place. And so if someone adds a new home within an existing district, they have to pay that same assessment.
Okay.
Hi, Josh. It's Gloria. And I'm wondering, being a newbie, the only way for the assessments to be increased is if the homeowners pay for that increase. What responsibilities does the city have in the different districts for funding?
You mean City of Elk Grove?
City of Elk Grove.
I don't know that they would have a responsibility per se. We are the park district here in Elk Grove. And so that's primarily something that, I guess you would say it's our responsibility to maintain these facilities. That's our understanding with the city. That's our working relationship with them. So I don't know that they would have a responsibility per se. If they chose to, they could do whatever they wanted, right? They're the city. If they wanted to work with us to pass some other type of funding mechanism, for example, a sales tax, that that would be used for this purpose. That is a possibility. I don't know that it is. I don't think it's likely right now.
Mhm.
And I think because of the benefits that we included in the presentation, we just feel very strongly that landscape and lighting assessments are the best funding mechanism for park maintenance. And they'll always need to be supplemented by other sources, whether that be fees or citations, rental revenues, things like that. But we just feel very strongly that the assessments are, it's a win-win for the property owners and the district to provide those services using those assessment districts.
Mm. And I do agree with what you're saying, and I also, based on your presentation, understand the current process that we have, but also the amount of money that we pay in local taxes and the assessments that are being placed on us through the county of Sacramento as well.
Mhm.
I guess my question is, I just always thought that some of those assessment money were given back to the communities for the services like park districts and other services that we have in the city of Elk Grove.
Yeah,
Some of the
so,
property tax, oh, did you want to?
no, go ahead.
Some of the property tax that the Sac County collects on behalf of the district or the city
Mhm.
Does come to the CSD, but that's for fire services as well as our recreation services. And so really, when the city was established, we own the parks. And so they weren't taking on that additional, I guess, burden, right, of funding the parks. And so there are some parks that after the city incorporated, they built and deeded to us, and they
Mhm.
actually collect CFD in those zones. So we collect a very small L&L assessment in the Laguna Ridge area. It's like $89, $90 a year, and that's pretty much for those district-wide type functions. But the city actually collects a CFD on those, and it's quite high. And so they turn around and give us the money to maintain those 7 parks right now. It'll be 8 here really soon when Oasis opens. So that's where the parks that they originally are collecting for, they're paying us for. Does that sort of make sense? And also in some of these underfunded zones, this funding issue of when these CFDs or LNLs were established a long time ago isn't something just we're dealing with. There's CFDs in the same areas. So their CFDs are for the medians. The city actually pays us to do the medians in the streetscapes in Elk Grove. Those are also underfunded as well. And so that's why you'll see sometimes things take a little bit longer.
Yes, I do see that. That's how Lisa and I actually became involved, just walking the city streets. So yeah, I do understand that. My other question would be, when the developers come in and these assessments are made, why is the maintaining of those parks not included in those assessments to some degree?
You mean the fees that the developers are paying?
Right.
Yeah, this came up in our last meeting. And I think the simple answer is they're simply not required to provide funding for the maintenance of the facilities. They're only required to provide the facilities themselves. And so the structure that we have here in Elk Grove, it's really not unique to our area. Again, that's not to say that the developer couldn't do that.
Right.
We're talking about businesses, and I don't know that it would be in their interest to do that unless they were required to by some state law. And as of right now, that law doesn't exist.
Yeah, well, I kind of figured that it would have to be something that would have to be on a ballot of some sort. But I don't know, I'm just thinking that if they really wanted to develop some land in Elk Grove that badly, that might be able to be a consideration.
Yeah.
So take, for instance, the Laguna Ridge area.
Mm-hmm.
Those are very large CFDs that the homeowners have to pay every single year on top of everything else. And so it gets to a point where, as a home developer, you're not going to be able to sell homes if on top of your property taxes and everything else, you're paying an extra, say, $10,000 a year for assessments and CFDs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's in the best interest, I guess, for the developer to try to keep those, work with the city and keep those fees kind of lower. Otherwise, their homes aren't attractive.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that you'll learn if you come, I don't know, Gloria, if you've ever attended our 101 class, but Josh goes over that a lot of these assessments were created, 20 plus years ago. And back
Right.
then, Prop 218 didn't exist. So if we needed to replace a playground one year, we could increase your assessments to say $400 or $500 one year, and then build the park and turn around the next year and drop it back down to $50. But after Prop 218 was voted in 96, we can't do that anymore. And so that's where, at the time, the district was worried about even keeping the L&L funding that we had. So had the voters not even approved what it was then, we would not be maintaining the parks as
At all.
Probably be like most cities, right, where they're kind of dilapidated and such. So that's kind of where the struggle is that we were so flexible and then just worried to even try to keep the assessments at all. And so now, as the cost of living and things increase, hasn't kept pace with the CPI, that's where we're really starting to feel that hurt of our assessments were never high enough to begin with. They didn't think about the long-term asset replacement, which we're doing now. So like where Jill lives over by McDonald, when we increased that assessment, we looked at 30 years. What would it take to do this park for 30 years? Because that's a whole playground cycle, benches, shade structure, all those things. And so that was all factored in. So we know that we will have the funding to maintain that park for 30 years, right? Unless for some reason things go up like 1,000%, then,
Right.
But so that's where the difference is when we're starting to do these overlays, or even, if we were to create a new benefit zone, really what we're doing more that long-term asset sustainability planning.
Yeah, makes sense. I understand. And I do plan to attend the class. I see it's the 12th of November.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and it'll be the same kind of structure. It'll be another Zoom webinar. So
okay.
In the evening, Josh?
What's that?
You'll send information as to the time and.
Yeah, so I'm gonna send a follow-up email to everyone that registered, even if they didn't come this evening, and that email will have the link to actually sign up for the class.
Okay.
It also have all the slides that we went over tonight and the links to all those resources I listed on there. And I don't have any, you guys haven't asked us any questions that we need to follow up with you at a later date. You've been very kind in that way. So, but if something comes up here before we wrap it up for this evening, I will have that information as well. So if you want to ask a really hard question before we call it a night.
It was informative. It answered a lot of the questions that I had prior to us, having the meetings. So I'm good right now.
Good.
So Gloria, just for my knowledge, I know that Lisa said she lives by Perry. Which park do you live next to?
I'm right across from it's
on Sheldon and Elk Grove.
Yeah, Sheldon and Elk Grove Flooring Boulevard, RAU.
Oh, you next to Rao Park. Okay.
Rao Park.
So we've actually moved Rao to a district-wide facility.
Yeah, Josh had explained that to me
Yeah,
prior to this meeting. So I do understand how that works and
right.
why it benefits more. And my concern more is the streetscapes, actually, what's going on with those in our zone.
Okay, yeah, that's
Yeah.
definitely then still,
Yes.
still
So-
zone 3.
There's 2 parks in my subdivision. There's one coming out of Heritage Hill onto Elk Grove floor, and there's one there too.
That's Amundsen.
Okay,
Okay,
yeah, and so that's completely, it's separate and apart from the one by
Right.
Arthur C. Butler?
Yeah,
Okay,
Yeah.
because I noticed
so
that.
When
you
we
know,
did the
this-
original survey, the folks around Amundsen were not interested in a assessment increase at the time. And so we did not include it with the Perry. We made the boundaries smaller.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll have to work on that. We need to do that too.
Hey, Josh.
yes, sir.
Yeah, this is Amandeep. Sorry for joining late, so I missed a lot of the information that you guys provided. Just listening to the last few minutes of conversation, the lady, I don't know her name because I came late. Sorry about that. It says Park and Golf Operations.
Oh, Rochelle. My name's Rochelle.
Rochelle. I heard Michelle, but I was not sure. Sorry about that. So, yeah, you should just mention that Prop 218 passed in 2016. The parks that I'm concerned about are the Sheldon Place and the Arcadian. And the homes around those parks, those got built in 2004 and 5. Certainly the Prop 218 was in place by that time. And if I'm wrong, please correct me. Because,
Yeah, I'm sorry. If I said 2016,
you said 1906.
it was
You said
1996. I don't know where I got that from.
No, you
It's a
said
long day,
1996.
right? I've been here since 8.
No, you said 1996.
Oh, wow. Wow.
96, yeah.
Yeah, no, you accurately said 96. Nothing. My question is that when these homes got built in 2004, which was 8 years after that, why the assessment was not calculated accurately, or what was needed? Why it didn't happen that way? And my another question would be that who sets up these zone boundaries? You just mentioned in one of the answers to the question that you guys make that zone smaller or bigger or left or right. I'm assuming there is a flexibility on the boundary of the zone. So why these parks are in a zone that it cannot pay for its own maintenance, and why those zones are the way they are? So yeah, these could be follow-up questions, or these could be, if you can answer right now,
Yeah,
up to you.
I can answer that right now. So when your homes that you're speaking of were built in 2004, zone 3 already existed. So
Okay.
anything built in the boundary
In
of
the
zone
zone.
3 takes on the assessment that's already there. So when that assessment was created, I don't even know when that particular one was, all of these additional parks with the amenities weren't necessarily known, right? And so as far as making things bigger or smaller, we can't change the original footprint of any of those benefit zones. That's why if we want to increase, we have to do new assessments. And so that's when I mentioned we were able to make the boundaries smaller, is because it was a new assessment. And so we were able to create the size of the boundaries and then send it out to those homeowners to vote on it either way.
Okay.
Your second question, Amandeep, it's actually an engineer who is making those decisions on, it's not simply changing the boundaries. We can't just simply add or subtract homes as we see fit. We have to show a special benefit that's being provided to all of the parcels that are being included in whatever the boundary is. And so when we're talking about shrinking or increasing the boundaries, really what we're saying is including or not including landscape. So when we only do an overlay assessment district for Perry Park, that's the one that we were talking about, we're only going to include parcels that are benefiting from Perry Park. So if we added, let's say Amundsen Park, then the boundaries of the district would therefore be bigger because there are more homes that are now benefiting from Amundsen Park as well as Perry Park. And those are determinations that are made by a state certified engineer. Amandeep, I think you had shared with me that you're a civil engineer, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, this would be a civil engineer that we would work with. Yeah, so.
Yeah, civil engineers are not 100% accountants, but yeah, they take that responsibility. Understandable.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also what we, when we do these overlays, we don't want to set them up for failure. So a great example of that was when we did the McDonald one. McDonald Park is in very close proximity to Lombardi Park, which is another underfunded zone.
Mhm.
And so when we did the survey, we could have gone out and done one overlay for both of them. However, the folks in Lombardi were not supportive of it. So if we would have added them in to the assessment boundary, we could have risked not allowing the McDonald one to pass.
Mhm.
And because of the efforts that the committee at McDonald had put forth, we weren't willing to take that risk without knowing, without them being supportive.
So I have a question. There was a question previously where one of the participants, they asked that what city can do. So since I'm running for city council, pretty soon we will find out what the results are. But I just want to understand that and the reason I'm coming up with this question is that I have a couple friends and their kids were playing on the street and one just broke his elbow because he fall down on asphalt and he still have the plaster and all that on his arm. And that guy was asking me like when these parks are going to get built. So I understand the concerns. I understand why this happened and why we can't move forward. But at the same time, where is the responsibility of the government services, which means either the city or the CSD? Because the kids that were like not even born at the time of these homes when they got built, and now they're teenagers, and they never had the opportunity to have a neighborhood park. Um, I'm open to see what other options can be. If, for example, this little thing cannot pass through because of the assessments, people are not interested. Now, think about it. Those people whose kids have already been teenagers, when you're going to take it to them, they're going to say, we have no interest in the park anymore because our kids have grown out of that park criteria.
Mhm.
So that's where the whole disconnect is that I'm feeling that originally people moved into that area thinking that okay, we will have nice parks, and most of them are flocking to District 4 and into that Sterling Meadows and all those areas because they see those facilities out there and they want to be part of that, and they don't realize that they are paying even more, way more than what they would be paying here. So I will try to educate them that way. I will have help from Jill and other people probably in future. But at the same time, I'm trying to see why city can't do anything to get these services
Okay.
in place and then try to get that money, like forwarding that or lending that money up front and then collecting it back later on. Maybe there is
Right.
some option.
So again, the city doesn't own the parks.
Right.
The CSD does. And when the city incorporated, the CSD and the city didn't necessarily play nice in the sandbox.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wasn't here, but I believe there was quite a bit of a turf war over the district even staying and not moving into part of the city. And so with that, we are now a totally different entity. And so really the parks are not the city's responsibility. They really are the CSDs. And so, in the spring, there was another survey that the district did to see if people would support a sales tax. But again, it was right at the beginning of COVID and it didn't get any traction. So, you know, there are larger conversations between the CSD and the city happening. But those types of things take time, right? We're not going to go out for a measure when we're doing a presidential election. Like all of those things have to be taken into consideration. And so is it going to be out of the question in the future? I can't say that, but right now, you know, you said, why aren't we just building the parks if we have the money? It would just be fiscally irresponsible for us to build a park knowing we don't have the money to maintain the ones that we currently are maintaining, because, you know, we're not in the business to kill parks. So it kills us when we don't have enough money to have the water on and you drive by and you see weeds or dead grass, right? Like that is just, as parks people, kills us. And so, you know, before I joined the district, I live over by McConnell Park. And so I was part of that team that was talking to neighbors and trying to go door to door and be active in the community, because we were tired for 5 years of, maybe it was even longer than that before I moved in there, but they had killed off a baseball field. And so that was the real issue that could happen. And so the district was not going to continue to build parks. And the Sheldon Place in particular, I know that there was an additional, so not only in 2008 when they did the original vote and that was shot down, they did another one at Sheldon Place. And so that one was not successful either. And so, you know, it's very expensive, Josh mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, to do to do these ballots. And so we don't want to be doing ballot after ballot after ballot that's failing, because that could be water for the next fiscal year to keep the park as green as we possibly can, you know? So it is a balance of what we do, but we're definitely not going to build parks if we don't have money to maintain them.
Yeah. Good.
So we will just continue to have these virtual meetings, whether there's 20 people that show up or 2 people that show up, because it really is just education. And part of that education sometimes is just having people realize that we are a different government agency as the city, and that parks aren't maintained by property taxes, right? So that's like one of the things we see a lot. We hear a lot, is, oh, I pay my property taxes. Well, that's great, but that's not the funding that, you know, your parks. And one of the reasons we were a little gun shy to go forward with this assessment ballot in the spring, not only was the COVID, but part of that was the return rate was what, 52%. And so that could go either way. Jill knows very well, you know, when those surveys come in, we really want to see them higher, because some people will be like, oh, I already turned this in. Maybe I don't need to do this again. And so they don't even realize that they need to turn those in. But also a big part of why McDonald and Perry were so successful was because the neighbors went door to door and talked to each other. And so when the middle of the spring, when people couldn't even leave their houses,
right,
we would not be successful, most likely, because we would be able to do that neighbor person to person, like, you know, outreach. That was so important, because that's when we were ready to go forward with it. It was like, okay, we can do this if we really go door to door. We put door hangers on everybody's door. We have people talk. We do these park outreach meetings. And without us being able to do that, we just didn't see how we were going to be successful. And so we weren't willing to spend the $35,000 to not be successful.
great point.
So I don't know if you guys can give out any numbers at this point, or it could be a follow-up thing. How much money are we shy of per year, annually, or whatever? What are we talking about? It might be that Josh has already did it in his presentation. I apologize for being late, but can I get that information?
So we don't normally do that until we get ready to go out to ballot. Jill can can speak to this, because really it depends on what amenities are in that park. So for the parks that are going to be revitalized, we really hold town meetings to find out what they want. Are they looking for basketball courts, baseball fields, whatever would fit in that particular park? And so we can't just throw out a number without knowing that. And in working with Jill's particular group, the original number came back, I think it was over $200. And the group just said, we don't think our neighbors are going to buy that. So we have to start looking at amenities and say, okay, well, maybe we don't do a full basketball court. Maybe we do a half basketball court, or maybe, you know, we put in some more, there's less grass. And so there's this back and forth kind of with the community to find out, to get us to a spot that we think that it's sustainable, but also that the community will accept it and vote for it.
And use it, yeah.
You know, and so as you can kind of see, most of the overlay assessments are around 135, 150. That seems to be the sweet spot, but that also depends, as Josh said earlier, how many people are in that assessment area. Is like Lombardi Park, there's only, I think, 200 residents or homes in that spot. And so whatever goes into that park, that's a burden that only 200 people have to pay. Whereas where I live in McDonald, there was 500 homes. And so the cost of the park revitalization was spread, you know, that's 500 people paying. So it's not as much as, say, maybe somebody in what Lombardi would be paying, just because there's less people to carry that amount. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Mandeep, are you asking about total dollars or like the amount per home?
No, I was trying to understand that what is the shortage money that we are talking about, or what is your assessment of maintenance cost for those 2 or 3 parks every year? Because I was under impression that one of the park, there is enough money for the park to be constructed, but there is not money enough for maintaining it. So I just wanted to see what that budget would be to maintain, because at least having one park going is better than not having any of them. And that's where I was trying to see what options can be brought forward, or how we can make it as simple as possible and get it approved by the maybe another overlay assessment area or something. So just wanted to get some ballpark number, that what are we talking about in dollars?
Yeah, so for Arcadian Village, I know that there's not even a master plan for that park yet. And so without a master plan, I wouldn't be able to come up with how much things cost, right? We know how much the playgrounds are. We know how much replacements are. I can tell you what our current cost is to mow. We could, you know, look at a similar size park and come up with a water budget, but without knowing what amenities are there, right? Because basketball courts have to be resealed every 5 years. Those types of things. And so without a master plan, we can't give a number. Does that make sense? Like we need to do that community outreach, find out what type of amenities the community wanted in those, because they could want a dog park. They could want a disc golf. They could want a full court basketball with lights. I mean, those are all different amenities that have different costs associated with them. And so while yes, the initial install would be done by the Quimby fees or whatever fees are available, the maintenance is all different.
No, I was just talking about the Sheldon Park, because I think what I have heard that is that Sheldon Park, there is enough money for it to be built. The only problem not building it is the maintenance. So if I am understanding correctly, if somebody's claimed that they have enough money to build that park, that means they have gone through the process of identifying what facility is going to be in there. And so if it is already figured out, I'm just trying to find out what the maintenance cost annually is that the neighborhood has to at least come up with. And if that number is available, I would like to have it. If not, that's okay. We can talk about it later.
Yeah, I can actually chime in, Rochelle. So our budget doesn't operate on a park by park basis. It's really a benefit zone by benefit zone basis, or in this case, an overlay district by overlay district basis. And so when we were calculating the proposed assessment for the area we surveyed last fall, we were factoring the cost for all of the underfunded parks in this area. So not just Sheldon Place or Arcadian Village. So having said all that, the assessment that was proposed when we surveyed last fall, not to say the numbers would be exactly the same, given that obviously we're a year has passed. The proposed assessment would have brought in around $600,000 to $700,000 in revenue, additional revenue. So that was our estimate of what we would need to maintain the unbuilt parks and then restore services at the parks that are already built. So again, that's not to say that's what it would be in practice, because some time has elapsed. And as Rochelle mentioned, it does depend on the specific amenities, but that is the general ballpark.
Okay.
I think Rochelle just disappeared.
Did.
Uh-oh.
But then I guess just to wrap up on that note, it's all good.
Okay, good. My computer just died.
That's my
Just-
phone?
No.
Just to wrap up on that.
How come
note,
my name comes up on your phone? Oh, because I had the invitation.
Josh,
Yeah,
Josh, could you say one more time what the assessment was to be for
Mine
the
is
rest of
also-
BZ3
Lose on my battery.
that you had calculated last year?
the revenue was.
Oh, revenue.
Yeah, the revenue that would have brought in was
38.
between 600,000 and 700,000.
Did you get it down to a per house, per household?
Yeah, I don't have those numbers in front.
Oh, do you
But
think
what
it
I-
was like 150 or something, somewhere in there?
Honestly, it was quite, it depends on where you live.
Oh, it was varied depending on the neighborhood. Okay.
But what I was gonna say is that when surveys go out, or especially when the ballot goes out, each property owner receives the exact amount that they would be required to.
Yes.
And so, yeah, that information is definitely included in the engineer's report once it's approved, once we get it produced. And then it's definitely included in the ballot as well. So folks are well aware of what they're getting themselves into when they vote yes or no. So hopefully that helps, Amandeep.
Yep. I appreciate your presentation and the opportunity to have this conversation. And I look forward to attend that class also on the 16th, you said?
It's the 12th, and I'll send you an email with the link to register.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So in the interest of everyone's time, we might have some early bedtimes, and that I do. We'll go ahead and wrap up for this evening, but thank you all for coming. Thank you all for volunteering. I know that Jill, Amandeep, Gloria, Lisa, you have all dedicated some amount of your personal time to public service. And so we sincerely appreciate all that you're doing for Elk Grove, all that you're doing for the parks in Elk Grove, and look forward to working with you all. So please, as questions come up or concerns, feel free to contact me, and you will be hearing from me in the next couple of days with that follow-up email. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
You're welcome, Josh.
Thank you, Josh and Rochelle.
Bye. See you guys later.
Bye.